The Sound of Music showed a fairy tale, not reality. The actor who played the captain hated the movie so much he called it the Sound of Mucus behind the scenes. The leading actress had a hair disaster when chemicals turned her brown hair bright orange. They had to bleach it blonde instead. The cast suffered through 11 miserable weeks of rain in Austria. Even the famous opening scene wasn't magical. The actress got knocked into the dirt 9 times by helicopter wind. This is the story they tried to hide from the public. Maria von Trapp never thought she would become an author. She was born on a train to Vienna in 1905, lost her parents when she was young, and grew up under the care of a harsh uncle who hated the Catholic Church. Ironically, Maria ended up converting to Catholicism and joining Nonnberg Abbey in Salzburg. Her life took another unexpected turn when she was sent from the abbey to work as a governess for the daughter of Gayorg von Trapp, a widowed naval commander. Despite being 25 years younger than him, Maria married Gayorg on November 26, 1927. Years later, after Gayorg's death in 1947, a friend pushed Maria to write down her life story. At first, Maria tried to prove she had no writing skills by scribbling a few pages quickly. Instead, she showed a hidden talent for storytelling. In 1949, her memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers, became a bestseller. But Maria herself later laughed about how the musical version made her look like a sweet angel. She said she was nothing like that, and people who knew her agreed. Maria was strong, stubborn, and far more fiery than the character Julie Andrews later played. Even before Hollywood touched the story, it had already become a hit in Europe. In 1956, a German film called The Trapp Family was released. Ruth Luberick played Maria, and Hans Holt played the Baron. It wasn't a flashy Hollywood production, but it touched a nerve with audiences still recovering from World War II. The film was a huge hit, making millions of Deutsche Marks in Germany and even doing well in American theaters. At first, Hollywood had a completely different plan for the Von Trapp story. In late 1956, Paramount Pictures bought the rights to the German films. They imagined a simple English version starring Audrey Hepburn, who was already a huge star after Roman Holiday and Sabrina. They even asked TV director Vincent J. Dunhue to take charge. But after watching the German film, Dunhue told them something unexpected. He said the film was amateurish, but the story itself was too emotional for a regular movie. He insisted it should be a musical starring Broadway legend Mary Martin. Paramount didn't like this new idea, especially when Hepburn became unavailable and the project fell apart. In a twist of fate, 20th Century Fox bought the rights in 1960 for $1.25 million. A risky move, especially since the studio was losing a fortune on its troubled production of Cleopatra. Nobody knew it yet, but this gamble would soon pay off. When the project finally came together, it started as something very different. Originally, The Sound of Music was meant to be a simple play with a few German folk songs sprinkled in. But Rodgers and Hammerstein, the famous musical team behind Oklahoma, and The King and I, refused to do it that way. They said they would only join if they could write a completely original score. This bold decision changed everything. It gave the world classic songs like Do Re Mi and My Favorite Things, and turned the story into a full-scale musical. Sadly, Oscar Hammerstein passed away from stomach cancer just 9 months after the Broadway premiere, making The Sound of Music their final masterpiece together. The musical opened on November 16, 1959, and became an instant hit. It ran for 1,443 performances and won 5 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. Even before the show officially opened, it had already sold more than $2 million worth of tickets. a record-breaking number for Broadway at the time. When it came time to adapt it for film, some changes were made. Richard Rodgers wrote 2 brand new songs, I Have Confidence and Something Good, to fit the movie better. When Robert Wise started casting for The Sound of Music in 1964, he took a huge risk. Julie Andrews wasn't a big Hollywood name yet. Some of the studio executives were nervous. They liked her charm, but no one knew if audiences would show up just to see her. Wise wasn't ready to bet everything either. He quietly made a backup list with safer, more famous options like Grace Kelly and Shirley Jones. But deep down, he had a feeling about Andrews. Then one night changed everything. Wise and screenwriter Ernest Lehman got a private look at unfinished scenes from Mary Poppins over at Disney. They only needed a few minutes. Wise turned to Lehman in a panic and said, "Let's go sign this girl before someone else does." They offered her a modest contract, $225,000 for The Sound of Music, and another movie afterward. It was a smart move. Even after signing, Julie wasn't completely sold. She sat down with Wise and asked him point blank, "How will you take the sugar out of this story?" That one question told Wise he had picked the right Maria. She didn't want a cartoon version of the character. Neither did he. They agreed to ground the story, make it warmer, but also real. While Julie was locking in the role of a lifetime, another battle was brewing on the other side of the cast. Christopher Plummer hated the idea of being in a musical like this. He thought it was too cheesy, too emotional, and he wasn't shy about saying so. He turned the role of Captain Von Trapp down again and again. Wise even started thinking about bringing in other big names like Bing Crosby, Sean Connery, or Yul Brynner. But Wise really wanted Plummer. He flew all the way to London just to change his mind. They made a deal. Plummer could work closely with the writers to reshape the captain. He wanted Von Trapp to have more wit, more edge, and a real emotional journey. Plummer even asked for a solo song to show the captain's hidden struggles. He eventually agreed, but he still joked about the movie behind the scenes, calling it The Sound of Mucus and S&M just to blow off steam. Finding the 7 kids who would play the Von Trapp children was even harder. They needed kids who could sing, dance, act, and feel like a real family. Hundreds of auditions followed. Some familiar faces like Kurt Russell, Patty Duke, and even Mia Farrow tried out. Farrow auditioned 3 times for Liesl, but Wise didn't feel she had the energy or the dancing skills the part needed. Daniel Truhitta, who played Rolf, got the part fast after showing off his voice. But there was a strange twist. The first scene he filmed was actually the end of his character's story, when Rolf betrays Von Trapp's. He had to work backward, figuring out how to make Rolf go from an innocent, love-struck boy to a hardened young Nazi. It wasn't easy, but he pulled it off. Behind the scenes, the cast had to go through some shocking physical changes, and not all of them were temporary. Julie Andrews, a natural brunette, had a hair disaster right before filming. They tried to lightly highlight her brown hair, but the chemicals turned it bright orange instead. There wasn't time to fix it properly, so they bleached and dyed her hair blonde. It wasn't her natural look, but it worked on screen. Daniel Truhitta's experience was even worse. To match the ideal Aryan look, his dark hair was bleached over and over. The chemicals were so harsh that he ended up with permanent hair damage. He later said he lost half his hair from the treatments, and it never grew back the same. It was a heavy price to pay for a few months of filming, but like a scar, it stayed with him long after the cameras stopped rolling. While The Sound of Music captured hearts around the world, the people of Salzburg weren't exactly thrilled about it. Most locals didn't even pay much attention to the movie being shot right in their backyard. Peter Husty from the Salzburg Museum later admitted he hadn't really known anything about the film until he was an adult. Part of the problem was that Salzburgers felt the story made Austrians look bad during World War II. They thought it was too romantic, and too many characters seemed like Nazis. What made it worse was how the filmmakers jumbled real locations, stitching together bits of different palaces to create the fictional Von Trapp home. Even today, many locals are still more familiar with the movie because of tourists asking about it than from their own memories. When director Robert Wise and his crew arrived in Salzburg in early 1964, they thought they would be done in 6 weeks. Instead, it turned into a soggy, miserable 11-week ordeal. Rain ruined almost everything. Scenes that were supposed to take a day dragged on for weeks. Do Re Mi alone needed 9 locations and 2 full months to shoot because of constant downpours. Whenever it rained too much, the crew had to rush inside to small chapels or nearby studios. And when sunlight was absolutely needed, they used giant lights shipped in from all over Europe just to fake a sunny day. It got so bad that nearly every light and generator available across the continent had to be rented. Housing and moving 250 people wasn't easy either. The crew included actors, stagehands, technicians, you name it. Feeding and sheltering them was a nightmare, and as the schedule dragged on, the costs exploded. On top of that, the kids started growing up too fast. Nicholas Hammond, who played Friedrich, grew 6 inches during filming. He wore lifts in his shoes at the start, but ended up barefoot later, while Charmian Carr, playing Liesel, had to stand on crates just to keep the height differences believable. Even little Marta, played by Debbie Turner, lost her baby teeth mid-shoot, and local dentists had to make fake ones so she wouldn't suddenly look different on screen. Things got so crazy that when they shot the big festival scene, they had extras in summer clothes, shivering in freezing weather. One of the scariest moments came when they filmed the scene where the kids fall out of a boat. 5-year-old Kim Karath, playing Gretel, couldn't swim. Julie Andrews only found out minutes before filming that she'd have to rescue her. But when the boat tipped, Andrews accidentally fell the wrong way, and little Kim went under. Andrews swam faster than ever before to reach her, but Kim swallowed water and ended up throwing up after being pulled to safety. That day left her with a lifelong fear of water. Even the beautiful opening scene with Julie Andrews spinning on a mountain wasn't as happy as it looked. Each time the helicopter swooped past her with a cameraman strapped to the side, the wind from its engines knocked her straight into the grass. It happened over and over again, 9 times in total. Andrews had to spit out dirt and hay after almost every take. She tried yelling to the pilot to fly wider, but he just kept giving her a thumbs up and shouting, "One more time!" Charmian Carr, who played Liesel, had her own disaster while filming the famous gazebo dance for 16 going on 17. The costume team forgot to put rubber soles on her shoes. During a jump, she slipped badly, crashed through a glass pane, and sprained her ankle. The crew rushed to replace her with a stand-in, but Carr insisted on finishing the scene herself. Even injured, she powered through the dance, and most viewers never even noticed the bandage she wore on her ankle during some shots. Meanwhile, Christopher Plummer, who played Captain Von Trapp, seemed to be enjoying Austria a little too much. He hated the movie's sweet tone and often called it the Sound of Mucus behind the scenes. Instead of moping, he drowned his frustration in local pastries and wine. His waistline grew so much that his costumes had to be taken out and resewn. During the emotional Edelweiss scene at the festival, he later admitted he was actually drunk. Looking back, Plummer described himself as a spoiled young actor who who didn't appreciate the opportunity he had at the time. The young actors also faced their share of struggles. Besides the near-drowning incident with Kim Carruth, they had other challenges too. Learning the synchronized bike riding scene for Do Re Mi took 2 full months of practice, even before they left for Salzburg. Singing and biking at the same time wasn't easy, especially for children. To make things harder, strict child labor rules meant they could only work a few hours each day, forcing the crew to be extra careful with scheduling. In some cases, productions even needed double casting to meet regulations, though The Sound of Music mostly made do with just the original 7 kids. Christopher Plummer never had an easy relationship with The Sound of Music. Even though the movie made him famous all over the world, he couldn't stand it. He didn't even like to say the name. Instead, he called it things like The Movie, S&M, or, most famously, The Sound of Mucus. In his autobiography, he joked about how sugary and sentimental he thought it all was. In interviews, he didn't hold back either. He once told The Hollywood Reporter it was so awful and gooey that it made him cringe. What really frustrated him was his character, Captain Von Trapp. Plummer thought the role was so flat and boring that it felt like flogging a dead horse. But he didn't just complain. He fought hard to make Captain Von Trapp more serious and layered. Plummer went straight to director Robert Wise and said the character had to stay sharp, strict, and clipped in speech. Only after all that toughness could the emotional scenes actually feel real instead of cheesy. Wise agreed. Screenwriter Ernest Lehman even thanked Plummer later, saying that pushing for stronger scenes made the movie better. Still, Plummer admitted that a lot of his harshest comments started out as jokes during boring press interviews. But once the media got hold of them, they took everything seriously. Julie Andrews, who played Maria, wasn't blind to the problems either. Even though she earned an Oscar nomination, she came into the project with real doubts. At the time, she worried that the story could easily turn into a sugary, over-the-top mess. The alpine scenery, the adorable kids, and those sweeping Rodgers and Hammerstein songs, everything was lined up perfectly to make it all too sweet to handle. Andrews sat down with Robert Wise and Christopher Plummer before filming even started to figure out how to get rid of the sugar. She later said Plummer was crucial to keeping the movie grounded. His strict, no-nonsense attitude gave her character someone real to push against. Their back-and-forth energy made their chemistry unforgettable. Despite all the tensions on set, Andrews and Plummer stayed close friends for decades, right up until he passed away. She often said that without him, the movie would have been way too soft. There was another hidden problem behind the scenes: Plummer's singing. While he looked the part of Captain Von Trapp perfectly, when it came time to sing Edelweiss, the studio didn't think his voice was strong enough. Quietly, without telling the audience, they brought in a professional singer named Billy Lee to blend with Plummer's voice and make the song sound better. For years, almost no one knew the truth. It wasn't until 2023, nearly 60 years later, that Plummer's original untouched recording was finally released to the public. By then, Plummer had already passed away at the age of 91. Hearing his real voice after all that time gave fans a glimpse of what could have been. It also added another layer to the complicated story behind The Sound of Music. Even though Plummer fought it at every turn, the film became a worldwide blockbuster, won 5 Oscars, and made nearly $300 million at the box office, a fortune for its time. And whether he liked it or not, The Sound of Music became a part of Christopher Plummer's legacy forever. When people think of The Sound of Music, they picture Maria showing up at the Grand Von Trapp estate in 1938, falling in love with 7 mischievous children and their stern father. But in real life, the story was very different. Maria Kuchera first arrived at the von Trapp home in 1926, not 1938, and she didn't come to be a governess to 7 children. She was just supposed to tutor one child, a little girl named Maria Franziska, who was recovering from scarlet fever. The family had already gone through heartbreak before Maria came into their lives. Gayorg von Trapp's first wife, Agatha Whitehead, had died in 1922, only 4 years earlier, from an illness much like the one that had affected their daughter. When Maria married Gayorg on November 26, 1927, at Nonnberg Abbey, she was just 22 years old, and he was 47. Their age difference was a full 25 years. But the way the movie shows it, you would never guess that by the time of the 1938 Nazi takeover of Austria, Maria and Gayorg had already been married for 11 years and had 2 daughters of their own, with a 3rd baby on the way. And that sweet, wide-eyed teenager Liesel in the movie? In reality, the oldest von Trapp child was a grown man named Rupert, already a practicing physician. Even the love story that charmed millions wasn't exactly how things really went. Maria herself admitted she wasn't in love with Gayorg when she married him. In her own words, she said, "I really and truly was not in love. I liked him, but didn't love him. However, I loved the children." She didn't dream of becoming a captain's wife. She had wanted to become a nun. When Gayorg proposed, Maria was so unsure that she ran back to Nonnberg Abbey to ask for advice. Mother Abbess told her it was God's will for her to marry him. Maria later said she was angry at both God and Gayorg on her wedding day because her heart had been set on another life. What convinced her wasn't romance. It was how Gayorg asked her to become a second mother to his children rather than asking her for her hand in marriage. If he had asked it any other way, she believed, she might have said no. There wasn't a glamorous love triangle either. The character of the Baroness in the movie was based on a real woman, Princess Yvonne. She wasn't interested in raising a big family. She had planned to send the von Trapp children off to boarding schools once she married Gayorg. After realizing Gayorg had feelings for Maria, the princess left, but not quietly. She allegedly spread a nasty rumor that Gayorg had gotten the young Maria pregnant before marriage. A scandalous accusation that Hollywood wisely left out of the musical. As for the dramatic escape over the mountains into Switzerland that everyone remembers from the movie, it never happened. Maria herself joked that if they had tried to climb the mountains outside Salzburg, they would have walked straight into Nazi Germany, not away from it. In reality, the von Trapps simply walked to the local train station with their backpacks, boarded a train, and quietly slipped out of Austria under the pretense of going on a family trip. No midnight chase, no climbing peaks, no dramatic music. They were lucky too. They left just one day before the Nazis sealed the Austrian borders. Their home was later taken over and used as a summer residence by Heinrich Himmler, one of the top Nazi leaders. From Italy, the family traveled to London, then sailed to America, arriving in September 1939 with almost nothing. They had lost most of their fortune during a 1935 banking collapse. In America, they toured as the Trapp Family Singers and later built a life in Vermont, where they opened a lodge that the family still runs today. But the movie left out even more uncomfortable truths. The Sound of Music painted a very soft, almost fairy tale version of Austria under Nazi rule. It shows the Nazis mostly as bumbling bad guys, like cartoon villains. The real horrors of the Nazi regime, the terror, the persecution, the suffering, are almost completely missing. The Anschluss, where Nazi Germany took over Austria, is shown mostly as a problem for the von Trapps' freedom. The fate of Jews and other victims is never mentioned. Even when the nuns remove the spark plugs from the Nazis' cars, it plays out like a clever prank, not the act of desperation it really would have been. This sanitized version made the film easier for American audiences to accept during the Cold War. It turned the story into a simple fight between good and evil, without asking hard questions about Austria's real role during the war. In reality, Austria wasn't just a victim of the Nazis. Many Austrians welcomed Hitler with open arms, and parts of the population were deeply complicit in Nazi crimes. That was something the filmmakers ran into when they went to Salzburg to shoot. When they tried to hang swastika flags around the old city to film the Nazi scenes, local officials refused. They didn't want to see those hated symbols on their streets again. Director Robert Wise threatened to use actual footage of Hitler visiting Salzburg, showing cheering crowds and Nazi salutes. Faced with that threat, the officials gave in and allowed the flags, but only under strict conditions. They filmed at dawn, hoping most people wouldn't see. Still, some locals woke up early, saw the swastikas, and were visibly shaken. The scars of that time had not healed. Even deeper than that, The Sound of Music hid a political layer that almost no one notices. The real Captain von Trapp was a symbol of Austria's strange political identity in the 1930s. Back then, Austria wasn't a democracy. It was an authoritarian state, run by a regime that hated the Nazis, but also cracked down harshly on its own people. Gayorg von Trapp's White Cross necklace wasn't just a Christian symbol. It stood for a nationalist idea of Austria being the better Germany, a Catholic Germany. The film shows this Austria as full of noble, traditional, conservative heroes, but the truth was messier. Many Austrians were sympathetic to Hitler's ideas. Others resisted, but not because they loved freedom and democracy, because they had their own version of authoritarian rule. When The Sound of Music hit theaters on March 2, 1965, no one could have guessed just how big it would become. Made with a budget of just $8.2 million, it didn't just succeed, it smashed every expectation. By November 1966, it had pulled off something unbelievable. It passed Gone with the Wind and became the highest-grossing film of all time, holding that title for 5 years straight. The numbers were staggering. Worldwide, it earned over $286 million. It was the first movie ever to cross the $100 million mark, something no film had done before. And when you adjust for inflation, the numbers get even crazier. In today's money, it earned about $2.366 billion. On United States charts that adjust for inflation, it still sits proudly at number 3, behind only Gone with the Wind and the original Star Wars. In some cities, theaters actually sold more tickets than the total number of people living there. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. But success wasn't immediate with everyone. When the movie premiered at New York's Rivoli Theater, some critics hated it. East Coast writers, especially, tore it apart. Bosley Crowther from the New York Times called it romantic nonsense. Judith Crist from the New York Herald Tribune thought it was made just for little kids and their moms. Pauline Kael went even further, saying it was a sugar-coated lie and that audiences had become emotional and aesthetic imbeciles. It was harsh, yet outside of the big cities, people loved it. Local papers and movie industry magazines praised it. Philip K. Scheuer of the Los Angeles Times called it 3 hours of visual and vocal brilliance. Variety described it as warmly pulsating and captivating. Director Robert Wise later joked that the big, fancy critics hated them. But everyday people and trade writers understood what the movie was about. Composer Richard Rodgers defended the film too. He said people might feel embarrassed by too much heart and flowers, but there's nothing wrong with showing real emotions. Over time, history sided with the fans. Today, The Sound of Music holds an 83% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and its reputation only keeps growing. The awards came pouring in. At the 38th Academy Awards in 1966, The Sound of Music took home 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Robert Wise. It also won Best Film Editing, Best Music Scoring, and Best Sound. The film had been nominated for 10 Oscars total, with Julie Andrews up for Best Actress and Peggy Wood for Best Supporting Actress. The Golden Globes also recognized it, giving it Best Motion Picture, Comedy or Musical, and Best Actress for Julie Andrews. The Writers Guild and the Directors Guild handed out more awards, celebrating the film's beautiful writing and direction. And its legacy didn't stop there. In 2001, the United States Library of Congress added The Sound of Music to the National Film Registry, calling it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Then, in 2017, the film's soundtrack was added to the National Recording Registry for its remarkable musical achievement. Today, the American Film Institute ranks it as the 55th greatest American film ever made, and the 4th greatest film musical of all time.